Okay, hello and welcome everyone. Thanks for taking some time on this December morning to join us to talk about travel. So, this is a session that we added. We didn't have it planned, but it came from recommendations from those of you that have been on our other training sessions. We do a survey at the end, and a lot of people said, hey, we'd really like to talk about, learn a little bit more about travel and how that pertains to our schools and ESUs. So, we put together this session for you today. I'm going to go ahead and jump over to our next slide. And we'll start with some introductions for today. My name is Lisa Laws. I am the Grants Training Specialist here with the Office of Budget and Grants Management, Nebraska Department of Education. I've got some wonderful coworkers with me. I'll let them go ahead and introduce themselves, starting with Tom.
I'm Tom Gashel. I'm the Director of Grants Compliance. Basically, I do all the audits and reviews or monitoring events for all the school districts. So it's good to be on today. Thank you, Lisa. E.
Absolutely.
Yes, good morning, everybody. I'm Nori, Grant Audit Specialist. It's great to see some familiar names and faces here, and I complete the fiscal monitoring events for districts and ESUs.
Awesome. And I just realized I always say your last name wrong. I always call you Nor, not Nori.
It
Get that right
happens all
next
the
time.
time. Yep.
You
It's a
need that little
palindrome.
apostrophe on the E.
Yes, yes, to make that stand out. All right, so here is our agenda for today's session. We scheduled it for an hour. Not sure we'll need all that time, but we love to leave plenty of time for questions at the end. As I mentioned earlier, this session is being recorded. We record the session so that we can post it for those who weren't able to attend live, or if you're looking for extra credit.
Everybody marked their fuel bill up this month.
Oh, hold on one second. Gonna go ahead and get someone muted. There we go. Or if you're looking for extra credit, you can always sign on and watch it more than once. So that being said, we try to keep the questions towards the end or ask you to drop those in the chat as we go through the session. That just makes for a cleaner recording for everyone, a little bit less distracting. So feel free to leave your questions. And like I said, we'll have plenty of time to dive into questions at the end of the session when we stop the recording for you. Our agenda for today is really focused around 2 CFR 200 475. So, what we have learned about travel as we've dug into it a little bit more is that the CFR really provides the guidance that we need. And so, this training session, we will literally have slides that have each part of that CFR guidance from A to F. We'll provide an overview of how we interpret the CFR guidance and what things we think are important for you to keep in mind as you're building your guidance for your school district or ESU, as you're creating your written policies. And that's really what travel is all about. There are guidelines that are provided, but a lot of it comes down to the school district and how they write their policies and then adhering to those things. So let me make sure I have everything. Oh, and I do like to always mention on our agenda slide, we are providing this technical assistance to help partner with you. Hopefully that leads to school districts, ESUs being successful because we are a partner in this. We want everyone to be following the federal regulation and getting it right and have it be as simple as possible. That being said, this does not substitute for you, in your school reaching out, meeting with legal counsel and getting that direction based on your particular situation. We always recommend that. And for you and your school district, reading and interpreting the CFR guidance for your situation as well. So we always like to add that disclaimer. So we will, like I said, go through the CFR. We're going to have a slide on each component of the CFR guidance. We'll go through it and then we'll provide some overview slides that dig into it a little bit more, help you to kind of translate what that might mean for you as a school. We'll provide lots of resources, as we always do if you've been on any of our sessions, and then time for Q&A at the end for you. So I think I've talked enough. Let's go ahead and dive into it. And I'm going to turn it over to Tom.
Thanks, Lisa. So why travel compliance matters? Well, just like it says here, it avoids audit findings, it ensures fairness and transparency, and it protects our federal dollars, our taxpayer dollars. Um, you also need written procedures and policies, and E will cover that later, so I'll let her go into that a little bit more. It also aligns with the federal requirements. It literally says in 200-475 that you must have written policies and procedures for your travel. And then it ensures fairness across the board, whether you're using federal funds or state funds or another source of funding for travel. It's all fair then. Next slide, please. And then kind of understanding 200-475 and why this has become an issue of focus for the Nebraska Department of Education. Just like you guys go through audits, we went through an audit recently here through OSEP, which is the Office of Special Education. And they wrote us up for a finding on travel because they consider it high risk. Thus, we're starting to do more education and more outreach and scrutinize travel a little bit more. That's kind of why this came about and the reason you've been asked to submit more documentation. Next slide is Lisa.
All right. So, for those of you that might be a little bit newer into your role or just need a refresher, when we're talking about the Code of Federal Regulations, we've got it up here on the screen. We've also got a link to where you can access that. We like this version. It's just easy to, to maneuver and find things, but highly recommend. I will say this CFR, the 475, is a shorter one, a little bit easier to manage and get through for someone like me who it doesn't, I don't speak federal regulation as my first language, so it is, Tom does, but it is a little easier to maneuver and highly recommend that you do dive into the regulations, after this session or, after winter break, dive into it a little bit more yourself as well.
Could be a good read over winter break.
I don't think so. I don't think so. I think you take your time off. You guys, we all know you deserve it. So, all right. So, like I mentioned, we're going to take and really just go through all of the CFR guidance. And here is the first part. So, part A, general. I literally copied and pasted this from the federal guidance. The only thing I did do is I added a few more a few bullet points into it just to make it a little bit more, I don't know, digestible on the screen. I'm not going to read it to you. So, hopefully most of you appreciate that. But when we're talking about 2 CFR 200-475, Part A, here is kind of a high level summary, and then we'll dive into it a bit deeper. So for travel costs, that can include transportation, lodging, something that they like to call subsistence, not a word maybe we use very often. That includes things like meals. It does also include lodging under that definition and other related expenses for employees on official business. Costs may be charged on an actual basis, so what you literally paid for, you can get reimbursed for. It could be on a per diem or a mileage basis, or a combination of those items. However, the method must apply to the entire trip, so we can't pick and choose which things we use for what. The approach must be consistent with the organization's written policies and normal practices. And then some portions of the travel may require prior written approval. That could be from a federal agency, pass-through entity when related to the award. So there could be some stipulations from different places that do require prior approval. So that is the high-level version. And let's go ahead and dig into that a little bit further.
Thanks so much, Lisa. So really to drive home the 200.475 to CFR, again, the costs that may be charged are going to be on an actual basis, on the per diem or mileage basis, or a combination of the two. So again, as Lisa said, this must be applied throughout the entire trip, the entire length of the approved trip. And one thing we really want to make sure and note here is as we were going through fiscal monitoring events and looking at the travel policies and procedures, there was some components missing as far as that reimbursement process. So obviously we have the 200.475 CFR there, but you also want to make sure and include that reimbursement process, which would also cover, these costs that may be charged and how your district or ESU is setting up these charges there. And these written policies and procedures, again, they really matter because it prevents the misuse of funds because, as Tom said, they're very high risk items for travel. It protects you from findings either with us or maybe another entity, and it promotes fairness and cost control. Again, that consistency of it being applied all the way across the board there. And it's used as a tool and a guide to make sure you are in compliance there. Next slide, please. All right. So the purpose, of course, is to provide that clear rule for staff for travel. It hits that compliance component, kind of like we spoke about, transparency, accountability, and consistency. Those are going to be the things that really set you up for success when we come in and see what that looks like and when we're reviewing the documentation. So the policies are guiding us as well. Some really important things to consider with your travel policies and procedures outside of the 2 CFR is a pre-approval process. I think we'll kind of talk about some exciting templates we might be adding later on here that are not required, but we think they're a great resource. Making sure you define allowable and non-allowable expenses. This is also going to be noted in that 2 CFR. But it talks about prohibited expenses such as alcohol or entertainment and clearly lists what can be reimbursed. So we have that, how much can you do and what can you do there? And then again, set those reimbursement standards in your policies and procedures and have those noted clearly. Of course, depending on the programmatic side, the federal and state rules or guidelines, making sure that these policies and procedures really align with all of those different components. And if not, just reach out to us. Let us know if you have a question on those. And even if it's a program question, we can get you to the right side of things. There are usually required documents depending on what type of reimbursement, the per diem mileage basis, what you select there, but also things like conference agendas, particular travel documents showing the mileage that you completed. Just know that sometimes those supporting documents may be required. I know that's been a big thing on our end. Efficiency is really, really important, making sure you're only allowing expenditures that are reasonable and necessary. We love those words around here because it's like, well, what does that mean? But again, just making sure that you're using the most cost-effective policy and procedure on what you're allowing. And then if it's something different, making sure you can provide that explanation on why it was more expensive and why that was necessary and reasonable there. Record retention, post-travel reporting, making sure you're holding on to those things for the required retention time, and just knowing that you'd have to submit those in the event of a fiscal monitoring. And just keeping in mind that this does contribute to your risk assessment score, but it also is a higher risk monitoring point. So just know if you have travel, it's probably going to be selected for sampling, and making sure you kind of well-rounded all into your policies and procedures there. Tom, I think you're up with the GSA.
Actually, I was going to sneak in there real quick just to add on
Please.
something, that I kind of missed earlier when we were putting together this presentation and really diving into travel a little bit further. It isn't cut and dry as far as what we can tell you that you need to do because there are options, which does allow for flexibility and everything like that. But the school district, ESU, you have the ability and the responsibility to set your own written travel policies and to implement all of these things from the CFR guidance, but that made this training a little bit harder to put together because we can't necessarily give you cut and dry, this is what you have to do. It is, here's what the regulation says that you should consider when you're building your written travel policies. So just keep that in mind as we continue along. And I'll
Lisa,
move.
Lisa,
Yeah,
this is Dottie from Federal
sure.
Programs team. I think now's a really good time if we could have you guys address. We sometimes have people ask for approval, or sometimes they do it and then ask for reimbursement to travel outside of what we'll call the 48 continental United States, right? And so I know recently we had somebody who they sent people to Puerto Rico for a trip, and we've had people ask for Hawaii before, or I don't think we've ever had anybody ask for Alaska. But thoughts on, because reasonable and necessary definitely comes up in those. Can you guys just address that a little bit and advice maybe you'd give districts if they're sending people to somewhere else? I know the latest for Puerto Rico, that conference was also in a couple states within the 48 continental. So would love input on that.
I'm going to jump in just for a second. Um, Being that that specific one is still under consideration review without final determination, I think it would be good to kind of say, I think we can provide guidance, but I think there could be further guidance that could come from the information that can be provided. But anyhow, go ahead, Tom.
Yeah, no, I would agree with Dottie. It's usually encouraged to travel within the continental 48, joined states, if at all necessary. If the conference is not provided, and it's like this year, I know for an example, they're doing an event for Perkins in Hawaii. So there's going to be a lot of people going to Perkins because that's the only event they can go to. Now, reasonable and necessary could also be, instead of taking all four staff members, maybe only two go. So just make those considerations when you're thinking about, yeah, we need to go to this conference in Hawaii, but we're only going to take two members of our staff. Like Jen, when she sends me to conferences and stuff like that, I go, but then I have to come back and give a presentation to all because it's good information for everybody to learn. So I hope that kind of clarifies that as far as, make that determination with your policies and procedures, and do your research as far as reasonable and necessary.
Awesome. Thank you, Jen and Tom. I appreciate that because
I'd
we
say
do get
it,
that question a lot.
yeah, I think ultimately the answer kind of becomes, for example, I'm going to pick on this one. Puerto Rico, obviously, there may be special, I'm just kind of going, if I was, actually living it and having to go through a process, to me would need potentially prior approval depending on what, and I do want to clarify and just add this element in. I know we say, because that's what the regulation says, that the entity has to have a travel policy. It also has a caveat that says, in lieu of this policy, say it doesn't exist or it doesn't address a specific circumstance, then that's when we go to the GSA regulation. What GSA says is reasonable. So, um, a, an entity might have a policy that doesn't mean it has to be aligned with GSA. It just means that it might have some requirements that if they aren't addressed, you would look towards it. So in this case, there may be pre-approval that's either required by the district policy or is required then in lieu of, because it doesn't address it, then we have to go to the GSA. So that's really what happens is if the entity's policy doesn't address it, we go to GSA. GSA then would say, yes, to travel outside the 48 states, then you do need prior approval. And so that's where you want to have kind of this form in place that helps address all of this for both reasons. We want the individual to be able to know the path that they need to walk down and approvals that they need to, because everyone has the best intentions. We want to get the proper approvals, and we want to make sure when they're getting that approval, someone knows what they're signing for. I'm going outside the 48 states. Um, but at the end of the day, what it comes back to is that reasonableness. So let's say I'm just kind of going, the entity says, yes, we're going to send our troops to Puerto Rico. Um, it's that reasonable element that has to be taken into consideration that if you could have went to other places, what is the amount that would have been seen as reasonably paid? And we might have to apply that reasonably paid. So it's not that Puerto Rico wouldn't be allowed, it's that the full rates might not be allowed, but somewhere in the middle might be. it's not a all or none. It's not a yes or no, but it's where does reasonableness land in the middle. So I'm sorry that doesn't make it crystal clear. It makes it more muddy, but it is that idea that that's what will be referenced is what is seen as reasonable, and that's what would be allowed to be reimbursed through pretty much any federal grant, and then all the state grants align with whatever federal regulation is at this point because there isn't state regulation to be consistent in practices. So that really kind of is the answer. The answer is somewhere in the middle of what's reasonable. And let's say at the end of the day, Puerto Rico's prices outside became reasonable with the other two that you said events had occurred. You might be paying the full rate of Puerto Rico. It's just for determining reasonableness is that answer. And obviously call anytime for guidance. So sorry, but that was a good question, Dottie.
Okay, I think we're on
Yes,
GSA. All right.
yes. And that's a good segue, Jen, into this slide. So yeah, if you do not have a policy and procedure, we will apply General Services Administration policies to your travel, and they are a little more defined. So I encourage you strongly to have your own policy and procedure. Plus, you'd be written up for non-compliance because the law says you must have a policy and procedure, and we that would be a monitoring event until you could get that corrected. But basically, what General Services Administration is about annually they go through and they update all their pricing for hotel, lodging, anywhere in the United States. They do have lodging rates for Hawaii, Alaska, and even outside the country. And they also do what they call a per diem, which is your meals, incidentals, things like that. Also for all of those different states, for so like Nebraska, for example, Omaha, and then everything outside of Omaha is GSA, as you can see here, or what they call the standard rate. But if you go somewhere like California, they're going to have like 36 different cities listed because, as anyone knows, San Francisco is much different than LA as far as pricing. So, next slide, please. Okay. Oh, yeah, and I did kind of just cover this. I guess I jumped ahead. Yeah, the per diem rate you need to check unless you have your own policy that says you're not going to follow the GSA rate, we're going to follow X rate, then you don't need to worry about GSA. But if you do write in your policy, we're going to follow GSA rate depending on the site travel to, you will need to go out and check that pricing and see if you were in compliance with that. Next slide, please.
All right. So again, we're back to our next segment of the CFR guidance. So the blue bar on the top is your clue to tell you that we are looking at another one here. So this is part B, lodging and subsistence. I knew I wasn't going to get that right. It's an interesting word to roll off your tongue there. So when we're looking at part B, for an overview, travel costs for employees and officers, such as lodging, meals, incidental costs, must be reasonable and not exceed normal charges allowed under the organization's established written policy. I know we hammered that one home a little bit just a minute ago. If charged directly to the federal ward, documentation must show the individual's participation is necessary for the federal award and that costs are reasonable and consistent with the organization's written policy. So again, just leaning into that example that was just discussed. And then when we look at lodging a little bit more closely, again, we're looking for that necessity and reasonableness, making sure that the lodging is necessary for the trip and reasonable for the location. We'd want there to show an avoidance of unnecessary upgrades or luxury accommodations, although we all love those types of things. Not necessarily going to want to look for those during your work travel with federal funding. Using the federal per diem rates or state approved lodging limits as a benchmark is a great thing to look for. If rates exceed those limits, we'd be looking for justification and prior approval as per your written guidance. Encourage definitely early booking, especially when we're talking about conferences and things like that. Oftentimes, a conference will give a reduced rate for early booking, using a tax exempt status where applicable to help reduce the cost, or like an in state rate here in Nebraska. Always looking for documentation such as itemized hotel receipts and those types of things. If there are situations that require the higher rates because of a thing like a conference, making sure to include that information on the conference and reasoning why the higher rates were necessary in that situation. And I think our next slide is going to go even a little bit more into specifically the conference travel. So I'll let E pick up with that.
Hold on one sec, Lisa.
Yeah.
I think Jen wanted to jump in.
Okay.
I apologize. Can you go back one slide? I just wanted to pass along one tip I think I would advise for writing a policy for an entity on travel when it comes to lodging. GSA, like you said, benchmark. GSA is a great benchmark. At the end of the day, for Nebraska travel, because I think I want to say for the work that we do in the state of Nebraska, we tend to travel a lot within Nebraska to two locations. I guess I'd say Lincoln, or three locations: Lincoln, Omaha, and Kearney for sure. So the one thing that I want to say through grants management, grant reimbursement that we've noticed a lot is the GSA rate has essentially two rates. One for, I want to say, the greater Omaha area has a rate, and the rest of the state is considered one rate. And we're noticing that the rate in particular I'm thinking of is Kearney is not enough through the GSA rate. So that is where I'd write exception, so in theory, I would write a policy that would say, hey, I'm going to follow GSA as a standard. However, I'm going to make an exception of up to this amount for Kearney, OP, Omaha, and maybe Lincoln. Places that you travel frequently, I would write that exception already into your policy, within reason why, pull a couple lodging rate. It's lodging. That's why I was kind of picking on this one, but it happens to be lodging that we're running into some issues where specifically Kearney is not enough in the GSA rate for what we would. So in theory, we can reach out to the feds and say, hey, we don't believe your rate's enough. Will you do us a review of this? But in the meantime, to keep that safety net in place for any of the entities, I would write exceptions to places that run higher. That way your policy has already blessed it and said, and addressed it. So I'm sorry. Thank you, Tom. I just wanted to add that little tip in. I think if I was writing one today, I would include that.
All right. Thank you so much, Jen. And this is the next slide here on conference travel. I think you'll hear a lot of the same kind of things. Make sure it's written in your policies and procedures. Make sure things are cost efficient. And that's also going to be the same for conference travel. So you will want to make sure at the time of pre-approval and approval, you can justify the educational benefit that aligns with your district goals. Such as, even if it's professional development, right? That has an educational benefit. Again, really focusing on that approval process, making sure that's included in your policies and procedures, and make sure, of course, you're following those. Clarify those costs, the per diem, how those costs are set. Is it through the GSA? Is it through a different type of policy and procedure that aligns more with how your district or ESU uses that travel policy? And then, of course, follow those. And like I had said kind of in a previous slide, just making sure you're documenting and keeping that on hand for the appropriate retention time that's required. And really, again, just being able to justify why. Next slide, please. All right. I also subsistence. I practiced this one in the mirror. Honestly, it's tricky. So this does include lodging, meals, and incidental expenses incurred during official travel. You will also want to refer to the 200.475 CFR for that as well to kind of understand that definition of incidental expenses. They should decide whether to use the actual or per diem allowances. Again, that's going to be in your policies and procedures. That applies here as well. Those two words that we love, reasonable and necessary for the purpose of the trip. And again, justifying why through your policies and procedures. And ensure that equity, consistency, and cost efficiency. Again, you're going to hear some of these words over and over again just because they're so applicable across the board, no no matter what you're doing with travel. All right, next slide, please. Perfect. Just kind of as I mentioned, here's a little bit more of an example of incidental expenses. Again, it's quoting that CFR 200.475. Small necessary costs may occur during travel, and this could be something like baggage fees, parking, tolls, and just kind of noting again those personal items or entertainment, as well as if a spouse was to travel with you, that's not allowable. And federal grants only allow that necessary and reasonable incidental cost. So really lean on this 200.475 CFR and also your policies and procedures when you're creating those. And of course, keep that documentation, retain that information there. All right, Lisa, I think you're up.
Awesome. Okay, so we're to our next segment of the CFR guidance, part C, which is all about dependents. So when we're talking about dependents, thinking about other people potentially traveling with you for your travel, temporary dependent care costs as well falls into that. And some temporary dependent care costs beyond regular care are allowable under the CFR guidance if they do result from a directly from the individual's travel to things like a conference for the federal award. This type of travel must be covered in the written policy, and any travel like this or any costs must be aligned with the written travel policies and be temporary during the travel period. However, travel costs for dependents are generally unallowable. And again, this would be something that you'd want to have covered in your guidance as well. And so typically what you'd want to have is only employee-related travel costs be listed as allowable. And if dependents like a spouse or even a child would be traveling with you, only the employee's expenses would be reimbursable under that policy. And you would want to make sure that you're capturing the documentation, especially if there is, I've heard of situations where a spouse might travel with and all those costs would be separate. You'd want to make sure that you have very clear documentation showing, that the costs being reimbursable are only for that employee that was traveling. And this, yep, we just have another slide here that goes into it a little bit further. So again, you're going to want to have an established written travel policy, calling out the fact that you want to list what is allowable and what is not allowable for dependents under your written travel policy. Travel rates. Sorry, I'm going to go to the next slide here. Okay, so we're gonna go into part D, establishing rates and amounts. So if an organization does not have an established written travel policy like mentioned earlier, then what would apply would be the travel rates and amounts following federal standards. So the rates set by the General Services Administration, GSA, or the president's designee. And this applies to travel under federal awards. And the long story short of our presentation is we highly recommend that you have, and it is against regulation not to have your own written travel policies. In lieu of that being in place, or like Jen mentioned, if it doesn't cover every circumstance completely in your travel policies, then it would default back to this GSA policies. And then we're going to jump into part E. We're going to cover the commercial air travel portion. So for commercial air travel, I don't think we usually call it that. We're just talking about flights, right? Traveling somewhere by air. Travel costs for for subrecipients would need to be, again, generally allowable reasonable. We would want to make sure that those flight costs, so in this case, we're avoiding any upgrades. So, as much as we might all love to fly first class, that's not generally required. Tom likes to fly first class. That's not something that we would see as an allowable cost. Now, of course, there could be circumstances where potentially that would be the only option, or for some strange reason, that is the most cost-effective option for an employee to travel that way. There could be circumstances where that would be allowable, that would need to be justified and documented case by case, need to have lots of that written documentation. There could be circumstances where the most cost-effective flight is just completely unreasonable as far as you're having to make 7 layovers and you're traveling from coast to coast to get somewhere where that ends up being so much time that there's added cost there with where it could be more reasonable, and for that plane travel to be a little not be the absolute lowest cost. But it's generally not about the convenience factor or the luxury or the preference. It's about what is the lowest cost, what is the most reasonable flights available. And again, all of this would be things that you'd want to provide documentation. You'd want to have in your written travel policy what this looks like for your employees so that they can book their flights and be confident that they're following the policies and procedures. Okay. I'm going to jump to the next one. I know we're running through these a little bit quicker. Part F is air travel by other than commercial carriers. So in this case, I think it'd be safe to say we're talking about flying private here, private airfare, chartering a plane, maybe. I don't know if any school districts own their own plane. Probably not. So that's what this portion is discussing. So this is talking about travel costs for a leased, maybe a chartered aircraft. I'm sure this could be in some circumstances. There might be some rare circumstances where this could be the most reasonable cost, the most effective, but that would need to be proven for a reason why this would be selected. So this would be selected if traveling by commercial airline was not available, not the most cost effective. So we would want to make sure that any documentation, any written policies include why this might be an option, and have all that documentation to prove that this was the most reasonable, cost effective option. And then unallowable would be any costs that exceed the cost of standard airfare, so flying commercial. Okay, and Tom, did you want to go into a little bit more in depth? I know I gave an overview of each of those, but
Yep, no, I appreciate it. Thank you, Lisa. With air travel as well, I would take into consideration, like Lisa said, if you're going to fly like 16 hours because you have so many layovers, that may be unreasonable and unnecessary as well. Plus, figure in your salary into that. You're being paid for 16 hours instead of maybe a 6 hour direct flight that is more, but by the time you put your salary in with that, it brings it into a reasonableness. So just make sure you document these things. So that somebody else, an outside auditor or our monitoring team or a reimbursement team, can make a reasonable and necessary deduction at the end of the day. Next slide, please.
yeah, I like what you just said there, because, the justification might be very clear to you as you're doing the research and you're looking to book something, but it's really about providing that justification and knowledge to someone else by just the documentation you're providing without having to, provide a long explanation. It should all be documented and proven that way. So I liked how you said that, Tom.
In-state travel, we just encourage you to book any in-state travel through your district so you avoid paying sales tax and being good stewards of your tax dollar money. And then out-of-state travel, we encourage you to work on a policy and procedure that would be fair for any source of money that you're going to use, whether that be state or federal. And next slide, please. And We are working on a travel template. It has not been approved yet, but basically this would cover all the necessary items that you'd kind of need and check those boxes. And then you could basically put that with your reimbursement as well and be like, here you go, this was approved by so and so. This is where we were going. This is where we were staying. This was the cost. Once we get that approved, we'll put it out on our website. I hope to have that done here in the next couple weeks.
And I will correct or add, Tom, you weren't aware, but we did actually upload the first
Oh,
version to our
okay.
website. It is out there and available. We'll just add the caveat that, it may change down the road. It's a starting place. And if you do have suggestions, feel free to reach out. Let us know what those are through our survey here or to our help desk that we'll cover. But we did get a version out there to get started. And we can't require school districts to utilize it, but we do recommend that you utilize it. And we did provide it as an Excel document so that there could be some additions if you needed to make it your own. So,
Thanks, Lisa.
yeah.
Next slide. And then fiscal compliance team, of course, there's me. And then E had spoke earlier and Shamar's on the call as well. So reach out to any of us if you need some help. And then Lisa's going to go into a bunch of resources.
Yeah, our resources that are available for you. We'll provide a few additional slides on these as well, but just to give you an overview, the fiscal monitoring page that's on our Nebraska Department of Education website, our training hub, which most likely you navigated to in order to sign up for today's session. And I also dropped the link in the chat and will do again once I'm done here for accessing that. That's where this recording will be uploaded for you so you can go back and check it out. Our fact sheets and templates documents, such as the travel template, all live out on the fact sheets and templates website, including that travel fact sheet, and that's a direct link to that one. Our General Services Administration, the General Services Administration website that we reference, and then of course the 2 CFR 200, a link for you there. And here's just some images here of our Training Hub website where we have upcoming recorded trainings for you and how that looks when you access it to be able to click and watch those recorded training sessions and access those materials. Our fact sheets and templates with the addition of that travel template that we just got added this week. Again, check it out and give us your feedback on that if it's helpful, if there's other things you'd like to see added there, or additional topics for either fact sheets or templates that you'd like us to add as well. Our contact information. So please reach out to us with those questions. Our top help desk here is going to be the main one that you'd utilize to contact the Office of Budget and Grants Management. So for all those questions for compliance, fiscal monitoring, those types of things, grants management, feel free to just send us an email to the BGM help desk, and we utilize Jitbit, which is just a system to help keep us organized, and we're able to get those tickets assigned to whatever staff is needed for that specific request. We also have a separate grants management system help desk. So a lot of you are probably in the grants management system. If you run into an issue, an error, a question specifically to the system itself, we have the grants management system help desk to be able to get you some assistance on that. And our survey, we'd love for you to provide us feedback on today's session and just in general, the topics that you'd like to see us to provide information. Like I said, this session was, partially due to the input we received from you guys on prior surveys saying that you'd like to see a session on travel. So we'd love to build additional sessions on the topics that impact you the most. Feel free to fill out that survey and give us that feedback. And that concludes our slide. I had to make sure. That concludes our presentation. So I'm going to go ahead and stop the recording, and then we'll open it up for all your questions.